wide receivers, tight ends, pass catchers, if you want to label them as such. Obviously, you had the massive injection of talent, at least that as a Florida State fan is hopefully the way that you view it, with all the transfer kids. Seems to be an opinion that Winston Wright's kind of your immediate number one. You would want spring to confirm that, in my opinion, if you're a Florida State fan. Will be fascinating to see how this kid fits in. I mean, great kickoff return guy. I think took one to the house against Baylor a couple years ago, and then took another one to the house against, I forgot who that was against. Doesn't matter. Not great piece of competition, but a guy who definitely gives you the ability to provide tools that you haven't otherwise seen in the return game, and just a guy who's, probably your number one featured wide receiver from the time that he steps on campus, if college production means anything at all.
I completely agree with that. I think this offense needs Winston Wright to be the number one guy. If not, I mean, look, there's all kinds of potential variants here. So who knows? Maybe it's Pittman. Kind of doubt it. Maybe it's Wilson. Very much doubt it. Maybe it's Span in 2022. I doubt it. But I think that if they want this thing to work, they need Winston Wright to be your best guy. He's certainly the most proven and has done it at a high level. And then here's the second question I have for you, because you have a pretty intriguing one, obviously, with another young dude. How many of the other transfer receivers are as good or better than Ontario Wilson? Because if at least one of them are, then I feel like that's pretty solid. Because if Ontario Wilson is your 4, like if one transfer plus Winston Wright plus maybe a Malik McLean, if they're all over Wilson coming out of spring, that's not that bad. Like then you have flipped the room. Despite the fact that, I had guys on staff be like, I don't know if we take the first 2 if we knew we were going to get the last 2, meaning Wright and Span. But like if Ontario Wilson's your number 3, okay, it doesn't mean you have a great number 1 and number 2, because you don't. But that's not a terrible college 3. He's a very experienced player. So I could see some upside. And this kind of goes with what we talked about last week with the projection metrics. Love this defense. Love it. I think they're overselling the defense slightly, but they might be underselling the offense somewhat as well. And if they are underselling it, to me, that's part of how it happens. And yet there's another guy I think you're intrigued by who's been putting up some serious squat rack numbers.
So Joshua Burrell, a guy that I'm really curious to see what Springs tells us about him. If you go back and watch the Notre Dame game, I'm not going to say the offense is built around him. That's a ridiculous thing to say, but he's really highly featured, and it's really curious some of the things that they're trying to do with him in some of those sets. I know Kenny Dillingham, big believer in Joshua Burrell, and I'm not suggesting that Mike Norvell's not. I think he is, but I do think it's, anytime the offensive coordinator is dead set on you being part of what he's trying to build around, that really helps. I'll be fascinated to see where he is, both in his recovery and how they try to use him in the offense. I think he's got a big role. I think he is one of the guys that they've brought in who they think, there's still some decent upside with, and developing, finding kind of that H-back hybrid role wherever it is in the offense. But really curious to see where Burrell is from a physical standpoint and what they're trying to do with him in the spring.
Just his strength, man. It makes me think, like, I'm not really high on these tight ends, as we'll discuss in a minute, or maybe several minutes. I agree with you. Like, well, if he can be a plus blocker, we saw McLean block fairly well at times last year also. So you may have something there. We'll see. Like, this is kind of what makes spring fun. Figuring out what you have. Maybe this guy flashes a different skill that you haven't seen before, or flashes a skill at a different level than you have previously seen. And then you put that into your plan. Like, wait a second. Okay. He showed me some of this. Let's try to refine that a little more over the summer and see what he can bring to fall camp. I'm intrigued. They will not have the worst receiver group in the ACC this year. I'm confident about that.
Nice.
I'm not sure who's going to be worse yet, but this will not be the worst one. I'm going to go out on the limb already and say it will not be 14 out of 14.
11 of 14. Yeah, something like that. One area where they may not be dead last, but they're not too far from it, unfortunately, is the tight end position. I mean, Cam McDonald's an entity that certainly everybody that's 35 minutes into a podcast like this is probably pretty familiar with if you're that emotionally invested. Cam's a nice player, certainly had some nice moments at Florida State, but it's not, still work to be done there, and things that could be improved upon. You gave some pretty interesting scholarships in retrospect at this position. Preston Daniel, Wyatt Rector, while Rector is featured more prominently than Daniel, have a hard time labeling either of those
Daniel
scholarships.
Got a lot of snaps too.
As a great decision. Well,
you know what I mean? Like
he did. I'd say, yeah, Rector maybe in his snaps a little bit more featured, but you're right. To the point. So two guys that probably aren't scholarship level players that have featured prominently, and certainly admire both of them. And a lot of hard work has gone into getting where they are. I'm not taking that from them, but if you're Florida State, you certainly hope to have a little bit of a different tight end looking room at this point. And you're adding some interesting guys, Courtney, the kid out of Virginia that everybody was so featured or fascinated with, Jackson West in his second year, prospect out of Alabama that I know some people thought might be a little bit better player than what his recruiting bio looked like. Marcus Douglas is a kid all the time that we talk about that they're fairly high on, but snaps have never really matched that. So big damn question mark when it comes to the tight ends, bud. And anything that spring can help me answer that question mark would be wonderful. But this is a little bit of a perplexing unit when you really try to evaluate where you are from a position group.
Yeah, the adjusted yards per target for Cam McDonald of 6.1 is not good, and he's also not a good blocker. So he's also your best tight end, and by a lot. Think about what I just said. Receiving production is not anything special. Blocking is not a plus. He's your best tight end by far. They really need one of Jackson West or Marcus Douglas to emerge a year earlier than expected, right? Like West, in my mind, was kind of a sit to, year 3 guy, maybe. They need him to be able to be the number 2 tight end this year, I believe. Or for their hype of Marcus Douglas to be like actually translate to some snaps on the field. Like that's why I have a hard time buying into that, because I got guys in the staff that are telling me, hey, like he's really good. Like he's going to be a special player. It's like, your room sucks so bad. You really can't put him out there for some snaps. Like this is what are we? Now you had Wilson last year, in fairness, right? So putting Douglas out there would have required basically as your third tight end, and he's very much growing. He's a raw player. So maybe I'm wrong to doubt. Could be. But I want to see on the field a little bit, something there. Because I don't think Courtney and Powers are guys who are going to make an early impact for you. Like they're actually nice developmental pieces, I think, just based on what I've seen of them on their huddle. But if this room's going to improve, I don't all of a sudden think that Preston Daniel or Wyatt Rector are going to play much better than they already have. To me, it's one of the 2 second-year guys taking a bigger step than I anticipate and playing as like a third-year level player, which is possible, I guess. Maybe.
Possible, certainly. Yeah, I don't, at the risk of redundant, I don't really have a whole lot more to say about this. Just a ton of bodies here. You've obviously allocated scholarships to the situation. It would be great for, somebody to really assert themselves as that second option behind Cam McDonald and potentially, put a foothold in for making this their position for the next 2 or 3 years to come. But a place that you're going to have to continue to try to recruit yourself out of. At the same time, you've got a hell of a lot of numbers on the board already allocated to the position. So interesting to see how they try to manage that.